Alrighty, guys, we are live with Sam Billings, and this is a recorded interview that will be transformed magically, or in the studio, less so magically, into a podcast. I'm going to welcome him to the show, and then we're going to go for there. A reminder to you, those in the audience who are watching the show, if you want to ask a question, put it in all caps. If you pop on here, just let people know on our socials that we are live. We went live a little bit early because, well, Sam and I are busy people and we're ready to go. Like, get ready for all the people who are about to invade our homes. I mean, come over to hang out on Thursday. Okay, so I'm going to give a little gap and then welcome him to the show. So, welcome to the show, Sam.
Hi, Nicole. Thanks for having me.
I really was excited to see your application come in because it's a perspective that we don't always get. People are really attracted to my podcast for all of the inspiration they get to start their own thing. But you came in from a listener perspective, which I always like because that means you have an idea of what we talk about, who the audience is, and you're coming at this whole building the life you want to live from a different perspective than some of our folks. So let's start with, who is Sam Billings and how did you go from, I don't know, deciding you wanted to water ski to what you're doing now?
I think I'm a little too top heavy to water ski, but I thank you for having me. First of all, I wanted to just say how much I appreciate your show and what you do for folks out there. And I know it's not easy to do what you do. And there are quite a few people, a podcast that I've listened to, and yours is always very well spoken and fun. And I just really have to give you some praise for really crushing it. And I hope that it continues to grow.
Thank you.
And I guess who I am a father and a husband and a gardener and kind of like a certified plant geek. And I've kind of been through this space for over a decade now. And I kind of went down the rabbit hole with permaculture and gardening and farming and got really disenchanted with it for a little while. Definitely some of my own fault. I will fall on that sword a little bit. I did it to myself a little. But I've kind of come back to recognize a lot of the value it does have. And I thought that my story might be helpful for some folks who are maybe just starting out or starting to get into a similar space. And I just wanted to maybe not have people make some of the mistakes I did or hear some tips and tricks. So thanks for allowing me to do that.
Cool. Well, you came in saying how working a job can be part of the right livelihood. That was the title of your show. And then your first question to me is, what is permaculture? And more importantly, what is not permaculture? So we're coming at this from a permaculture standpoint. Let's start with, how do you define permaculture and what's not permaculture?
Sure. So what I was taught permaculture is, and I've honed this down a little bit to be a more concise answer. There's a joke that if you ask 10 permaculture people what permaculture is, you'll get 10 different answers. The most concise way I've heard it is that it's an ethically based ecological design science. And that is, I think, how most people are going to think about it. But what it also is, I think it's kind of two things, is it's also the catalyst and the culture around that society, and that people use that to get interested. So for me, that's where it's even more valuable, is not the science itself, but the world around it that kind of draws people into the sustainability space, to the homesteading space, to kind of go from 0 to 1, which I think is so much more valuable, to go from never having heard of it to starting to get involved than someone who's maybe going from a 7 to an 8, or becoming a little bit more of an expert in that space. So that's what it is, I think, to me, is the science itself, about designing gardens, about designing your life and your homestead to work for you. It could also be used to design farms. I've seen it in a bunch of different applications. I've seen people design kitchens with permaculture. I've seen people use it to do graphic design. So that it can be applied, or the principles of it can be applied to other spaces. But what I think it's not is any more than the sum of its parts. And what I mean by that is, it's not better than homesteading or different than gardening, or it includes arboriculture and irrigation and integrated pest management. And it isn't, because you take a permaculture design class or you've worked in that world, it doesn't replace experience. And that was something that I'll get into it a little bit more, and I think I tell the story a little bit, but that was the biggest thing that I had to learn the hard way, was that it is not a replacement, or it doesn't make you, a farmer growing things in straight rows isn't necessarily wrong. There's just a lot of more accepting of the normal way to do things than I had originally been.
Yeah, it is funny how people who go through a lot of study on permaculture without practical application, and I've been meeting more and more people who they're attracted to my podcast because I'm into permaculture and we're implementing permaculture designs here. And it's taken me years on my property to do what I want to do. And it's a little bit at a time rather than spend thousands of dollars on one big plan. Both approaches have their place. But what I know is that I don't know a lot about permaculture. The more I learn about permaculture, the less I know about permaculture. And by taking these small strokes here, I have avoided a world of hurt. And everybody I know who's a top mind in permaculture has created some baloney, right? They're like, this design is the perfect design. And they do it. And they're like, well, that was a bad idea.
Yeah, there is
They're
a lot
learning
of
too.
mistakes for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it is better to make those mistakes on paper. Like, that is certainly true. I'm happy to draw things out ahead of time still. Like, I think there's a lot to be learned from permaculture. That's a great lens to see things through. But yeah, like you say, I think that knowing your space and knowing what you're after, and taking it piece by piece is generally a lot better of an approach.
So I know from reading your bio that you have deployed a food forest and you started a vegetable farm. So it's not like any of this stuff is totally foreign to you. How did big permaculture fail you? And what do you mean by big permaculture? Like big ag, big permaculture?
Yeah, and maybe that's a little bit of a passing the buck a little bit. I had failed myself on some of that stuff too, so I don't mean to not take that on. But what I mean by that is that, well, let me tell my story a little bit more, and I think that'll open it up a little bit. So when I was in college, I had studied a whole bunch of things. I changed my major a bunch of different times, and I was a philosophy major for a while because I was a college kid and existential and trying to figure out what the hell I wanted to do and what was important. And I worked in kitchens, and food was always important to me. So it became clear to me, and I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here, that food is everything, right? It's like how we get our nutrients from the land and how we interact with our environment. And I'm not going to harp on that and beat the dead horse too much, but I realized that I should be a sustainable food and farming major. So I switched and I got into agriculture classes, and I spent tens of thousands of dollars learning how to farm and getting a bachelor's degree, a piece of paper that says, congratulations, you know how to farm now. And
Did you know how to farm at that time?
no, hell no, I still don't. I don't know if anybody really does. um, and I sure thought I did, though. And I did. Not to say it was useless. I certainly learned a lot there.
Yeah.
Um, and I took a permaculture class, and I actually got college credit for it to go take a design course and learn from some of the really well-known local folks who are still, well-known authors in that space. And we started this permaculture club. I don't know if we called it a club, but we put gardens in front of the dining halls at the UMass campus. And we set up this replicable model where it could be taken to other campuses. And actually, the year after I graduated, they won like this National Champions of Change award. They went to meet Obama. They did all this like very well documented replicable model of putting permaculture gardens, quote unquote, in front of dining halls. And we thought we were pretty good at it. You put the trees in the north, and you put the herb spiral near the door, and you set up the keyhole shaped beds, where people could access them, and there was the sitting area for the students, and uh,
Sounds like Gaia's garden.
it does. It's a lot of guys garden type stuff, and I don't know about you, but I've probably seen and implemented maybe a dozen herb spirals, and to me, at this point, like I don't think that there's any, like I could just put it in the garden. Like I don't think the spiral part of it. I don't know. I've never seen that like actually change how well the herbs grow
I
in
have
there.
done 100% zero herb spirals in my life.
I
I
think
look
that
at those, I'm like, that looks like a lot of work, and I got a hill right over there where I can put the plants in the ground.
that's exactly right. So there's a lot of like hocus pocus stuff that we I don't know, I've started to get away from a little bit more. And essentially I had used uh I got really deep into the permaculture world at that point, I guess. I read all the books, I met all the people. I went to the Permaculture One conference out in California with Diego and all those
Yeah.
folks, uh, and I had been cooking with someone who we had this conversation with, and he said, I have this client that I work with, and they are out in Connecticut, and they have this 20-acre estate, and why don't they don't really know what to do with it. It's a lot of grass. Come down and take a look. And I went down and took a look, and long story short, I ended up using their land as my senior thesis project. And this
Mhm.
is 12 years ago now, 15 years
Right.
ago,
Right.
and put garden, like a permaculture design garden on 2 of their acres. And when I graduated, I said, hey, this was my project. I got an A, and here's a budget and a 3-year salary and a plan to implement it. And they said, go for it. So I worked for this wealthy family, and I did all sorts of stuff that. Can you still see me? I'm kind of going in and out
Yeah.
here.
Just don't worry about the video. Just get the audio is going well, so you can just keep
Okay,
going.
great.
Yeah.
And I did exactly what I said I was going to do. I set up the garden for them, and I learned an awful lot the hard way, and
Yeah.
while someone else was paying for it, which was nice. But I pretty quickly realized that it was kind of for no one. It was like this big, beautiful garden that the family would see, but they didn't want to have tours or guests. And as much as I thought I was doing these permaculture things, like there was one point where I had like our, I was putting wax on mushroom logs that was our beeswax from our hives that I was burning over a biochar stove that I was applying with, like, it was like this whole big thing. And I was like, yes, I'm doing it. Like, this is like, you know, permaculture. And then nobody saw it. Maybe the mushrooms got eaten, maybe they didn't. And it was like all this effort and all this time and all this money that went into this, like, a couple mushrooms you could have spent a few dollars on at the farmer's market. So it certainly, like, I'm grateful for that opportunity, and I'm glad I did it, but I quickly was looking around for other opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
And my girlfriend, now wife, was living in Massachusetts, which was a 3.5 hour drive from where I was. And I saw that there was farmland that they were looking for a farmer. So the owner was looking to have a farmer live on site and kind of revive this old farm. And I
Mm-hmm.
thought that's a really cool opportunity. And we ended up interviewing and touring the property and putting together a business plan and a proposal. And I had, we got this, it was actually a 40-acre property, which we actively farmed about maybe 2, depending on where you drew the lines. And we rented the land and owned the business and got to live in a little house as part of our lease
Oh, nice.
agreement.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which was really great. It worked out to be I wouldn't have been able to afford to, have the farm and start the business otherwise. And that's sort of where I cut my teeth on the farming part of it. And man, I thought I knew what I was doing. So the short of it is I hadn't learned enough about business. Like, growing the food is the easy part. And I'm sure you can attest that, like, having a business, or like maybe you have seen that in the coffee
Yeah.
business. Like you're adding, like the more you touch something, the more you're post harvest processing it. Like it takes so much time to get it to the consumer that as one person you can only do so much. And I could grow as much lettuce as I wanted to. Like I had the knowledge to grow the crops, but it was the business aspect and the lean manufacturing part of it, like the production of vegetable units, that I had no clue what I was really getting myself into.
Hmm. Hmm.
And like if you say, like, let's say, you want to make $50,000 a year, which average salary, right? Then for me, if I was having a 50% margin, which is really damn good, which I don't even know if I ever got to that point.
Yeah. I will pretend.
Yeah, I would need to grow $100,000 worth of vegetables,
And
and
sell them.
and sell them. Like that's the sold vegetables, right? And can you picture what $100,000 worth of vegetables looks like, and where you would store them and move them and package them and ship them? Like, and that part of it just like totally didn't hit me until it hit me
Yeah.
that, like, oh, there's like a whole like business planning aspect of this that I just had to learn the hard way. And we did make it work. Like it did work. We got there. Uh,
Yeah. Did you
we
get to
ended
the
up,
50,000 mark for yourself?
probably not.
Where do you think you got?
Mm, probably 30.
Yeah. So that means you
And
were selling $60,000 worth of vegetables
probably,
and eating for free.
and eating for free,
Yeah.
and getting to live on site
And living for
for
free.
not, well, not for free, but close to free.
Yeah.
And I was real stubborn about it. I must have spent 100,000 hours on, it's 100-hour weeks every week to get to that point. And I was doing personal chef stuff on the side
Yeah.
and taking winter jobs and kind of just doing whatever we could do to make things work. We had a little CSA. I sold to some restaurants, and I would use some of the stuff that I grew as my personal chef, uh,
Right.
ingredients, and that would help a bit too. Um, but I guess had I not lost the farm, like so the landowner ended up having to sell the property, and our
Hmm.
lease didn't go with it. And had I not been forced out, I don't know if I ever would have gone. Like even though just because it's like so difficult and so much work, I had put so much into it and gotten so like
Yeah.
dug in so hard that I don't know if I ever would have let it go if I wasn't forced to.
It's kind of funny how we do that. Like we work really hard and don't want to let something go when it's clearly not working. And one of the keys to success in business is learning that that sunk cost fallacy is a fallacy,
Yeah.
right? Unless you have a magic way to make it better or a way that you can do some changes and it will make it work for you. It doesn't matter if you put 20 years into something and all of your life savings and it still doesn't work. You're not salvaging it if it's not going to work.
Yeah, that's right. And man, I did a lot of work on the business. Like after that first year when we hardly made any money, it was
Hmm.
like I probably had 50 different crops that I tried to grow because hey, I knew how and I thought they
Yeah.
were interesting.
Yeah.
But I'm one person and each crop takes its own sales technique, it takes its own packaging, it takes its own planning and bed space, and I only had so much ability to do that stuff. So I think my second year I maybe had 20 crops, and then
Yeah.
by my last year there I think 4, 5.
Yeah. Now you know how monocropping came to be.
Yeah, totally.
It's
Because
like I can make a whole bunch of money if I just grow corn.
yeah, and I
People
have the
like
big
corn. I
hundred
sell out of
thousand
corn
dollar
every
equipment
year.
that like I need to use to grow the corn, and I can't afford to get the $100,000 equipment that I need to process whatever else, soybeans.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh gosh,
Um,
soybeans. Yeah.
but I didn't grow any of
Soy.
that. But
No.
I guess what I wanted to get at too was more that I quickly saw how much it's still business. Like if you can't afford to do the fun stuff, that no one is coming to you looking for you because your tomatoes were grown on contour and the potato leaf has a bricks count of 12 or 13, and there no one is that value isn't from the customer. That's my value. Like I'm putting
Right.
that on it because I think that's great. And sure, there is some value in like the fact that maybe it needs less pesticides because they're healthier or something like that, or it doesn't need any, or it doesn't, need the fertilizer because the soil is great. But that's all my value. No customers. I'm not getting more sales because my tomato is more nutritious than the tomato down the street, or it's grown in a permaculture system. Like, no one's out there looking for that, or the people that are so few and far between that you might lose them just because the other farm has got a better location, or it just happens to be that they're also selling the other thing that they're looking to buy that day. So for
Yeah.
me, it was very quickly. I had to learn to draw the value from the customers and not impose my own what I thought the business should be.
That's probably the most important lesson you learned, is how to see the value of your product through the eyes of your customer. And when I work with customers on marketing and developing their marketing position, the majority of what I'm doing is working with them to shift their perspective from why they think their product is important to why it's important to the person they're selling it to. Because it may be important to you for a whole host of reasons that nobody cares about at all, and that won't sell a thing. And if you're only sticking to the message of because it was grown on contour or whatever, what'll happen is the first thing you have to do is educate your customer that that's a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Wherein, if it's because it looks great, tastes good, and is the right price and is easy to get, if all of those things are what are important to your customer, and by the way, you do grow it in a permaculture way on your side, which hopefully makes your life easier and not harder, great. They don't care about that other piece. They care about the other four things. And getting people to let go of why they think things are important is really hard.
Yeah, especially when you're coming at it from like the permaculture, right? It's like the ethically based ecological design system. Like those ethics are generally what draws people into it. And I was a person that like can totally bury myself in the why and lose the efficiency of the how.
Yeah, if we could get more permaculturists to let go of it, I think it's important to teach permaculture and to teach, and when people are ready for it and come to it, give them what they need to start implementing some of these practices in their lives. But I don't see our job. I think if we can make high quality food produced by our systems and the beauty produced by our systems, if we can make that sexy, it doesn't matter if they know it's permaculture or not.
Absolutely.
It just is. It's just a good way to do it. Oh, you want me to design something for you? Okay, let's talk.
Yeah,
Let's talk
like,
about what that means.
oh, you're doing a farm tour? Hey, that's clever how you do that thing. Like, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard, I mean, you can, one of the best ways I've heard permaculture described is the art of not shitting where you sleep. And I think it's just like so perfect. It's like, it makes, when you look at it in a broad sense, it's like, oh yeah, I guess you can call that permaculture because it just makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
And to me, that's kind of like how I'm getting back into that space a little bit, is like, where was the value in all this stuff? And one is getting other people interested in it, like being that sexy shiny thing that the college kid was like, oh yeah, I want to like be the farmer who's in the hammock.
Save the world with permaculture.
Yeah, like that. I think that's valuable though. Like, it's got a lot
Yeah.
of bullshit to it, but it's also got a lot of like ability to draw people in and go from 0 to 1. And I think that is probably its most valuable aspect. And the design part of it is like you said, as we're going, we try to think about the yields and needs of certain systems, and we can marry those things, and that makes our lives easier. But it doesn't have to be, or it probably can't be, like the selling point, or like the thing that gets you into it. That's the cautionary part of this whole thing, is the business. If the business dies, you're not growing anything.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If you're not being able to support yourself, if you can't pay your rent, like, it doesn't matter if you're using biochar or not.
I've never used biochar a day in my life.
And I bet your food is awesome.
It is. It is.
And there's totally value to biochar. And
I'm not anti-biochar. I just never learned how yet.
Yeah. Essentially, you burn wood really, really
Yeah.
hot, and
Yeah.
it increases the cation exchange capacity in the soil, and
Yep.
yeah,
The closest I get is I have ash from my wood stove.
yeah.
It
Potash
gets
is good
spread
too. I
around.
throw a lot of ash in my garden, uh, and I also, not to like. This is coming from, at this point now, I farmed for 5 years, and I did make it work. We didn't like go broke doing it. We just had to beat my head against the wall to get to a point where we were somewhat successful.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm a certified arborist. I've been in the garden space for 15 years, a certified horticulturalist and landscape professional. So I've kind of like been through it and like done all the reading and gone to the classes and done all this stuff. And now that I actually have this experience and I know how to really set up an irrigation system where I can identify pests and know how to integrate the management of those pests into my system in a way that is logistical. Now I'm starting to see how all those pieces fit together.
Yeah.
And to me, I wish I had kind of gone in the other hole of the permaculture rabbit hole and worked my way backwards through it the other way, because it's like I have this big goal of like all these systems working together, and there's nut trees with different cows and pigs moving underneath them, and we have the vegetable garden, and like all of these things that this big harmonious 100-acre property.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't start there. You have to
Yeah.
like have the one thing that works, or the couple things that work, and build off of that.
My goal is a harmonious 3.2 acre property right now.
Yeah.
You know why?
Yeah, because
Because I have a 3.2 acre property.
I have a 1.5, and
Yeah.
we got our chickens and a little greenhouse and some gardens, and that's great. And I have no intention of producing all of our food.
Yeah.
I grow the stuff that I know I can grow with little input and tons of value that you can't buy that quality in the store or at the other farmers market. So we stick to garlic and ginger and leafy greens and herbs and that sort of stuff.
Sweet. Our goal is a little loftier than that, but I have livestock. I have enough
Yes.
room for livestock. That makes a huge difference on producing enough food to survive. Though, I don't know. I wonder what we'd eat if I really couldn't get any external imports from anybody. I'm a big fan of the permaculture community around you too, where I'm not getting 100% from this 3.2 acres, but next week a cow arrives in bags, frozen.
Yeah.
And that cow lived 3 miles that way and it was raised on grass. And I'm cool with that because there's no way I'm putting a cow on my 3.2 acres.
Right. That would be your whole 3.2 acres.
It would. And we have sheep here and I like lamb, but I like beef too. So
Oh yeah, sure.
it's a quality of life thing. I could just eat the sheep, I guess, and the venisons.
But you get to go out and make that community now, and you
Yeah.
get to meet the other farmer, and maybe you get to share with them or share stories,
Oh,
or
totally.
just not have to do all that stuff. Like, now, if you have a cow and you want milk and meat, that means you need to have more cows.
Yeah.
Right? Like, they need to be bred and milked, and there's
Yeah.
a lot that goes into doing that.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people get into this I'm going to be self-sufficient thing, and for like the most important part of that is community.
Sure.
You're not self-sufficient, you're community self-sufficient or self-reliant.
You're providing some sort of value that there is a hole for in your community. And that was the other part of starting the business, is I did no research of my surrounding areas, or like the other farms, or like what were the people asking for. I was like, I'm here and I'm a permaculture garden and come buy my herbs, versus like, oh man, like there's another farm like 3 miles down the street and they do a pretty good job. They're organic. Like, should probably talk to them first. So
they've been doing it for 10 years and
yeah. And who am I to come steal their business? And I wasn't really. They're still there. I'm not. But, and they do great. We're actually pretty friendly. I was just there yesterday. And they get to meet a lot of folks in the space who have done a lot of great work there too. So that was really good. And I think it makes sense to address the title of this show too, which we're talking about having a J.O.B. And after the farm closed, after I learned that they were selling.
Before you jump there, I have a question to set the stage.
Please.
So you worked on building this farm for 5 years?
We lived there for 5 years. We had
5 years. There was a moment where you were like FML.
Oh yeah,
Okay,
weekly
tell me what that moment was like. Was there a day where you're like, I can't do this anymore? I'm so tired. I wish I actually had time with my wife. Like, what were the things around that time when you realized this is unsustainable?
Oh man, I think the first one was like year 2, and I had strawberries to plant. And if you ever grown strawberries from like on a large scale,
Yeah.
largish scale, large for me scale, they come bare root. They get these little
Yeah.
tiny like octopus looking like nub root things. Then you
Yep.
dig a trench in the soil and you plant them all in and cover them up. And I put row fabric over it so I wouldn't have to deal with the weeds. And I had this whole system set up, and I got them. And the only time, I don't know how this happened, I kind of forget, it was a while ago now. It was like 30 degrees and pouring rain. And it was the only time I could get these things in without them rotting or dying, and it just like
Right.
had to happen. And I'm out there in like overalls and whatever else I could get to like. I didn't have a tractor, so I'm like digging the trench by hand as it's raining, and just freezing and soaked, and like the connectors of my overalls are like right over my nipples, and they're bleeding from like being rubbed on in the freezing cold. And I'm trying to, and I think that was the first time where I was like, oh my god, like I better sell like the world's best strawberries. And we did. The strawberries were great, but that was probably the first time that I really thought about throwing in the towel. And other times would probably be like market related. You'd go to a brand new market and spend a whole Saturday like getting everything ready for all week long and bring it all with you, set up your tent, and then nobody shows and you go home with all your stuff,
Everything. Yeah.
and you might as well have just like gone to the beach for the day. And what a loss that is of time and money. And
Yeah.
as soon as you grow a tomato that isn't sold, you're better off having done nothing. Like
Hmm.
the amount of time and effort that goes into that, like you have to work from what's sold when you think is going to be sold and then plant backwards off of that. And that was certainly a learning curve too. It was like as soon as you're composting this stuff, like the value of it is just skyrockets down. Well, I guess not skyrockets,
It
nosedives.
devalues. Yeah, it
Yeah.
totally does. So that was when you realized, and was your wife helping you, or was she doing something else?
So she's the sign language interpreter, which is
Okay.
great. And she was working at a school for the deaf at the time. And so she had her own full time job. And she would come help. She's a much better weeder than I am. She's very
Yeah.
like OCD when it comes to weeding. And I'm like,
Nice.
just, you know, I'm like competition based, like, oh, they're gonna outcompete that. That's fine. And she would get out there with like the fine tooth comb and really get everything clear.
Yeah.
But when it came to like the labor of it, the planning and all the, it was mostly me. I will certainly say she helped. She helped a lot in the fact that she would like cook and clean and do laundry and stuff, and I didn't have to focus as much on that, and that would allow me to do more of the work.
Yeah.
And so I certainly she helped, but not in the traditional sense of like being a partner on the farm.
Okay, so there you are. It sucks. You say FML, and then they lose the farm somehow, or need to sell the farm. We don't need to go into the details of that per se.
Yeah, that's a whole
Which
show in itself.
it's a whole thing in itself, I'm sure. And you're like, okay, I have learned a lot in 5 years. What made you decide to get a job, and what kind of job did you get, and how does that work into what you're doing now?
Thank you for that. Well, at first it was we fought it. We tried to like get us our lease to go with the land to try to buy the property ourselves, and none of that was feasible. And we thought, okay, well maybe we can find some land around us, but we're like suburbs of Boston. Like land is crazy
Yeah.
expensive.
Yeah.
Um, we had done well enough that we were able to keep doing it and pay off some loans, but we didn't have the money to like really buy land or even lease it and start over again. Like just the prospect of putting up fencing again, about building a walk-in fridge again, about like all of the expenses that go into starting a new property in terms of the
Mhm.
farm, I just couldn't swallow it. We were trying to start a family, and it just didn't make financial sense. Like the risk and the capital to start versus what we were going to be making, I just couldn't justify the numbers.
Yeah.
And I had been selling produce to a chef, or to many chefs, but to one chef in particular. And I told him this whole story because he was trying to have me plan stuff for him for next year. And I said, well, this is probably the last season. The property's going to get sold. And he knew that I had worked in kitchens for a long time, had some chef experience, and had worked with me and liked me enough. He said, well, we're starting a new restaurant, actually. Why don't you come be the chef with me over there and open a new restaurant, and I'll buy all your produce you have left for the season.
Yeah.
And it's that second part of the sentence where I was like, okay, that sounds like a great place to start. We're going into the winter months here anyway. I'm going to need something to do. You're going to buy all my produce. Let's go.
Yeah.
And I worked at the restaurant for about 6 months and quickly remembered why I didn't like working in restaurants, especially because we were like starting a new restaurant, like opening a restaurant. And I don't know if folks have ever done that before, but it is an insane task.
Mm-hmm.
Just the amount of, I think I worked 7 days straight for better part of 2 months. And it was good to have the salary, and we were still living on the farm and paying a little bit. So we were able to like save enough money to buy our house, which was great. But I knew pretty quickly that I was not going to be in that world for a while. And I found a job after that at a landscaping company, which is where I am now. And at first I felt like, I'm going to get a job. It's a job. It's a landscaping company.
I failed. I'm getting a job. Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah.
But I kind of loved it. So I was working for, it's a really high-end company. We have some great accounts with huge gardens, and my role was a garden crew leader. I had a couple people that worked with me, and we would go from garden to garden. And I certainly knew my horticulture and the plants and what they needed. So they weren't vegetables necessarily. There were some vegetable gardens, but mostly it's perennials and ornamentals. But I know how to prune, and I know how to deadhead, and I know how to plant, and I know how to have people work with me and how to be efficient on working with tools and all that. So I was kind of really enjoying it, and I, like anything I do, kind of went really hard at it for a couple of years and got promoted to have a couple teams of gardeners reporting to me at that point. And now I am more in like the account management side of it, where I work directly with the clients, set up their services for the year, make sure that the gardening is being done properly, that they're getting the services they pay for. And the people I work with are just awesome. Like, they've been in the industry for a really long time. They are interested in education and continuing education. So I've taken a bunch of certification courses and gone to a bunch of conferences and classes, and again, learned a whole bunch of stuff that I thought I was pretty well versed in. And now there's these people that have been in this industry for 20 years, like I get to work with every day, that are professional arborists who know every Latin name of every tree you've ever walked across, and how to prune them, and what they need, and where they should be planted, and where they grow naturally, and every native perennial, and how the pollinators interact with them, and how to read a soil test, and some stuff that I don't really care about, like lawns and grasses. I've had to learn and go through all that, but
Yeah.
it's some other part of the thing that people are interested in. And the company is very interested in great work-life balance. So I can kind of make my own schedule a little bit at this point. I've gotten a little bit more leash now that I've been there for a while, and they know that they can trust me to get my work done. And I have teams that I work with that report to me, and it's just fun. Like, at this point, I get to go out and make beautiful gardens and turn it off when I'm not there, and kind of still use all of those things that are important to me. And I can still source. I can recommend native plants. I can source good soil. I can use things from other local purveyors, like vegetable starts. I can go to the local farm and buy those. So it still gets to have that permaculture influence. I'm often designing gardens for clients that make sense for them, and I just don't have to call it that. Like, I don't have to necessarily say that. And there are some folks that are interested in it, or they'll come to me when they want to learn more about edibles. But I still get the hands in the soil without having to be the one planting all of the strawberries, or whatever it is. And I don't know, I'm pretty grateful for where I landed, and I still get to have the energy to go out and do my own gardening. versus being the one to, drag 100 hours a week out in the field or something like that. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's kind of where I am now. And I just think it's been a great transition. And I am happy to kind of let go a little bit of the entrepreneurial side of it. And I don't think I would have gotten there had I not tried it for whatever it was, 5, 6 years.
Yeah.
And I just don't want people to feel like because they're not starting their own permaculture farm that they aren't that any part of self-worth is tied to that.
Mm-hmm.
That you can still have I have my little acre and a half homestead out here. I'm still involved with getting our community to have more sustainable gardens, more roots in the soil, uh, more organic practices, and that's great for me. And it took me a while to accept that and appreciate that. But I think there's probably a lot of folks out there who might um, have the same inclination that I had, which is like I must create something. I had this piece of land that is mine that they could quickly wind themselves into. I think I was very lucky to not be in a ton of debt after all of that, honestly, and I
Yeah.
think that is a certain
Had you
trap.
bought that farm, you would be in a ton of debt right now.
Exactly. So I am. I guess it's more of just a cautionary tale, and from someone who's been through this for better part probably almost 15 years now, that I welcome folks with questions or with other similar stories or recommendations of how to go about that process in a different way. And I just thought, having heard you interview other folks tell their story, that maybe mine would be valuable to somebody out there.
Yeah. What strikes me is, first of all, do you have a side hustle?
Of course.
Of course.
I
Okay.
can't.
So he has a job, but he might be earning a little something on the side because he's good at growing vegetables. Is that correct?
It's actually not vegetables, believe it or
It's
not.
not. What is it?
It's gardening. So it's like gardening services.
Okay. So he makes sure other people can grow vegetables.
Yeah, or even just
whatever.
like perennial beds,
Yeah.
flower gardens, pollinator beds, that sort of thing. And of course, it's all in a very different demographic, different location than the company that I work for. There's
Right.
no competition there. I'm not stealing any clients. I have to make sure that I say that out ahead of time.
Yeah. You don't want to get busted.
Yeah,
I'm
not
sure they
that
know about it anyway.
probably.
Yeah. So he has a side hustle, and the primary income's coming from a job. The job is a job that allows him to further some of the permaculture principles and the passion that he has for making the world a better place. But let me ask you this. Have you addressed the financial side of your life by being able to earn money and save it and those sorts of things?
Absolutely. And I mean, I'm not raking it in or anything like that, but we have health insurance and 401k and like all of these things that were out of the question with farming, or at least anything. We still had health insurance, but it wasn't great, and it's very expensive. I'm sure a lot of folks can attest to that. And yeah, like I said, now I'm the father of a 1-year-old boy, or almost 1-year-old boy, and I wouldn't be able to do what I was doing before. Like, I want to buy him nice things every once in a while, or just make sure that we're comfortable with getting food on the table, with not living, head of lettuce to head of lettuce.
Head of lettuce to head of lettuce.
That's really not like, you can picture how many heads of lettuce it takes to pay a mortgage.
I don't know. They have risen in price this year.
That's true, and I knew that mine didn't have salmonella, so that there is certainly still some value to that. But
yeah, well, that's the other thing. I think a lot of people get really enamored with the idea of being an entrepreneur and running their own thing, and I certainly encourage that. I love that lifestyle. It is not easy. Like I had COVID all week last week, and I still had to work.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't like, hey, I'm just gonna. I mean, Monday I just basically took to the bed, but every day I was like, here's the list of things that have to happen. And while I can put off some of those things, like some of these things still have to happen. And I'm lucky that I have somebody trained to roast and ship coffee, because I did not touch any coffee last week, obviously, because people eat that. But on the promotion side, on the recording the podcast side, I had a big old webinar that I did on Saturday. I couldn't just put that off. It, unless I was in the hospital, it was going to happen. And I think one of the cool things about having a job at a bigger company is sometimes when you're sick, you just get to be sick. Not
Yeah.
all companies. I'm sure people are listening to that going, no, they make me go to work sick, Nicole. But you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, at least like I said, I get to make my own schedule, work from home sometimes. So I was sick, like maybe, and I very rarely get sick. Like 2 weeks ago, it
yeah,
wasn't COVID; it was just some other nasty thing.
yeah.
And I just
There's nasty
prioritized
things
my
out there.
computer work, and like I did my computer work, and I got a few things done around here, and I actually didn't even have to take time off because I was able to just organize it in a way that I still got the stuff done,
Yeah,
but I didn't put other people at risk when I was sick. And that
right.
worked out. It worked out awesome. And like I said, I do have that entrepreneurial itch. I can never really help myself, so I do still have that side business. I mean, for tax purposes, it's great. I have to be able to, when I can go to make business to business accounts at some of the larger nurseries, or
Yeah,
there's certain benefits of having a business, even if I'm not doing a ton of money in that. And should I want to buy something extra for Christmas, I can pick up an extra job or an extra planting. And I actually haven't done any marketing around it at all. I don't have a website. Like, I'm not here to try to sell that service to these folks. And it's just really local. Like, I've said no more than I've said yes to a lot of
yeah,
jobs. It's just word of mouth. People who know who I am, that know that I have that skill, that are like, hey, can you come design this for me? Or hey, can my landscaper keeps pruning this thing with the hedge trimmers and it looks awful and it's dying inside. Can you please come just prune this correctly? Or like tell me when to prune this thing that I really need to, like.
yeah,
And some of it's just consulting and some of it's some physical labor. And it's been, they say that the best time to start a business is when people are begging you to do it. And it kind of came from other people like being like, can I please pay you to do this thing for me? Like, okay, fine. I guess I'll register a business. And it's just like little stuff on the side more than it is uh, a long-term plan. But I also gives me that like FU money a little bit at work. Like
yeah,
if I would ever, you know, feel like I was being undervalued and I wanted to make, I have something to fall back on. I'm not going to go to
yeah.
zero income right away. And that part of it is great.
Yeah, and that is nice. We have a question here from Margot. What's one piece of advice you would give to someone who wants to start their first garden?
Take a soil test.
Why?
It's like driving without a map to try. People say, well, what should I add to my soil? What's my garden? Like, where are you starting? So definitely, it's really easy. I don't know what state you're in, but most extension services from the local universities will have a soil sampling lab, and they have instructions on their website, and you just follow those. I would certainly recommend getting an organic matter percentage as part of your soil test. That's usually a little add-on, a few extra dollars, and they will make. You can say, you can check off a little box that says this is going to be a annual vegetable garden, and they'll say, great, you need to add this many pounds of nitrogen per acre or this many pounds of this fertilizer, and your organic matter is this percent, and then you can start to actually make the soil something that is going to support itself, have a healthy cycle, and then you'll greatly increase how successful your garden is. The healthier plants will naturally repel more pests, they'll have better yields, and it just is a heck of a lot easier when you're starting with some decent soil. And I would also just make sure that you really do have the sun that you think you have. So a lot of folks will say, well, yeah, I'm growing all these peppers and they just aren't doing so well, and I kind of look up to the sun, and maybe you're getting 6 hours of sun, and peppers really want to have like 10 to 12 at least. So there's make sure that you're putting the right plant in the right place in soil that can support it, I guess, is
Yeah,
the short answer.
that's good. It's funny because I have the opposite problem here. Too much sun
Oh,
in Tennessee.
oh wow, that
So
is definitely opposite.
my garden was in the sunniest place, and it was here when I moved here, and it's still there. And I have let the trees grow up because the sun is brutal in July and August here.
Sure.
It's just bad. So it's kind of funny how, depending where you are geographically, rather than the sunniest place in your yard, you might be looking for some shade, especially afternoon shade.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something I think. The other thing I'd add to that, go talk to somebody locally who grows a garden and ask them what they do. How did they start a new garden if they were going to start it? Because they know more than you do. I moved to Tennessee from Oregon, and it took me years to figure out when I'm even supposed to plant stuff.
Yeah.
Because I was wrong.
Yeah. And after doing it for a number of years, you start to find the things that are worth your time. Like, I can grow all sorts of stuff, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's worth it.
Right.
So I've learned now. I have a greenhouse out there in our backyard that's just full of spinach. It'll be full of spinach all winter long.
Yeah.
And that's because I've done it a bunch and I knew when to plant it. I knew how to plant it. And I know that that's really valuable for me to have in the winter.
Yeah.
And the cost is super low.
Yeah.
Versus trying to produce, like for us, peppers are actually pretty difficult because we just don't have the sun or the season to do it.
Yeah.
Like, I could grow a few if I really wanted to, but it's so much easier to buy them from the farm.
I feel like those of us who love growing, we all have a couple of plants we eke along because we eke them along. I have a banana bush out there. That's not something that you grow. There's not a banana farm in Tennessee for a reason. Right.
Yeah.
But I have the one that makes me happy, and maybe it'll live. And I took all sorts of rabid action this fall to make sure it maybe overwinters, but we'll see.
I think that's my tree crops. I had a little orchard when we had the farm.
Yeah.
Maybe 40 trees or something we planted, and they were great. And they were out in the middle of the field. And we got a fair amount of like Asian pears were super successful.
Yeah.
And I planted them because I love them at this property. And it's not a big open field. And we have squirrels.
Squirrel.
And chipmunks. And because we're not in the middle of the field, they're not afraid to just climb up and take everything. And I have like 3 or 4 trees versus having 40 trees. So when you lose
everything,
they're just gone. And I still have them because I like them, and I'm going to baby them along, and maybe we'll get a few Asian pears. But it's a very different task than having a small orchard.
Did you hear my episode about the tomato and the caterpillars? I grow a wall of tomato on my south-facing wall every year, and it shades the house, which helps with air conditioning. Produces lots of tomatoes, and there was this really active caterpillar or set of caterpillars that kept eating part but not all of my tomatoes. And I'm out there with a black light because they'll glow at night, like all of these things. I'm trying to figure out what is this creature, because I've never seen. I'm not usually you have leaf damage too. Mm-hmm. Nope. And one night I'm sitting out and I have just sitting by the fire pit, and I look up. And there's a rat eating my tomato from the eave of my house. My God. I did not have a caterpillar. I had a rat, and that rat was gone by the next day. I was like, So I was actually kind of glad I didn't do what I usually do and just, cut off the uneaten parts of the tomato. I think I was too busy to mess with that. So I was only taking whole tomatoes and dealing with them. But yeah, my caterpillar was a rat.
Yeah, we had a rat going into the chicken coop this year, and I had to add some extra hardware cloth around the outside of the chicken coop and make sure that all the food was in the tins, and put down a little bit of ways to catch rats.
Yes. I will admit this one got baited and poisoned.
Yeah. There is actually one organic rated poison for rats and mice that works pretty well. That the reason it's organic is because it doesn't persist into the next thing that eats it. So there's like the hawk that eats the rat that isn't going to die.
That's what I use.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah. No, I have too many canines around here to know. It's just somebody's going to get sick if I don't do that. So yeah, you want to be careful if you're going to use bait about using bait. Okay, cool. Well, usually this is where I'd ask you, how do we, follow you online or support your business? But you don't have one you're looking to grow. So what can we do to support you after this wonderful interview?
I think just with Thanksgiving coming up, maybe go out and support your local food co-op or your local food bank. Thank you. And make sure that other folks out there are able to enjoy Thanksgiving, enjoy the holidays, and share some good local food with them.
Awesome. Well, Sam, thanks for being on today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was great. I really appreciate all you do.